Okay, we've been going slowly through this 12th chapter of the book of Romans for a particular reason, and that is because every sentence is just packed full of instruction about how we ought to live. It is practical instruction. It's not just something that is a theory and that you would think about and you'd think, that is an interesting thought. I want to give that a little thought, you see. The things that are here in chapter 12 are the things that he says, this is what you should do. And so we need to give ourselves a test. We've been talking about that. Testing yourself, how do I live up to this particular thing? And so it's just one after another. And so today we're going to pick up our story. Not going to go back and review the things that we've been talking about, but we'll pick up where we left off the last time. And we'll notice again that he's just going to tell us, now do this, do this, do this. It's just kind of like taking that hammer and driving that nail in to do this, do this, do this. So it's kind of a test. Now, Rod came up the last time and gave me a good example. Now, I can make fun of Rod because the example he gave me shows that Rod has gotten himself into a lot of trouble. And it also tells me that he has been scared to death. Now, I'm telling you this, he didn't say that, but I know he has. And after class, you can ask him. You can say, Rod, tell me about some of the dumb things that you have done. Now you say, well, how do you know that? Well, Rod came up and he said, this thing is just like flying an airplane. He said, you go up and you're flying an airplane, and of course they teach you to follow your instruments. Now do whatever your instruments say. But every pilot, at some time or another, for one reason or another, doesn't follow his instruments. And so all of a sudden he realizes, wait a minute, I'm not, wow. And then he tries to get back on course, and you can't believe how hard it is to get back on course. So Rod says, so you got to fight it. You got to fight it to get back on course. But then he said, once you land, then you're really happy you did it. You see, you're really happy you did it. Now, I'll give you an example that happened to me back when I was flying, to kind of give you an illustration, and I know you won't laugh at me, but you can laugh at Rod. In order to get my pilot's license, my private pilot's license, I had to fly into Springfield, Illinois. Now, that's up where Balagovich, has his office, and so can I tell you something there. But I had to fly in there to take my flight test. So I go in. I'll not tell you about the big boo-boo I made going in. So we get right to the point. I go in, and I pass the test. Wow. So I fly out and heading back down to my home in Casey. Now, I know where I am. It's just like you right now. If I tell you, okay, everybody go home. Nobody's going to come up and ask me, Lowell, which door do I go out of? See? You just get up and your car's out here, your car's out there. You just go and you get in your car and you drive home. You don't need anybody to tell you. Well, that's where I was. I knew where home is. Home is right down there. And so I take off, go out, get out of the pattern, and I start flying right toward Casey, Illinois. And so I'm just flying along, and of course just as happy as I can be because I passed my test. I'm just elated. And so I'm just flying along, and I know what I'm doing. I want you to understand that, see? I want you to understand. I've told you I don't make mistakes. Right there is where it is, just like out there is the front door. And so I know where I'm going. And so I'm flying along, and all of a sudden, I look down at my compass, and my compass said I should be going this way. Now, I know better. That's just like me telling you the front door is out here. So everybody come, jump, run, and run out the front door over there. That's the way you feel, see? And so you're there. Now, the reason I told you about Rod is because he's got himself in these things, and that's the way he felt, see? I know how he felt. The compass said, you go this way, but I know beyond any shadow of a doubt, it's a nice, clear, sunny day, you go that way. And so finally then I said, okay, I'm going to do what I'm taught to do. And so I turned the plane around, and I went this way. And so it's the hardest thing in the world. And then in a little while, I'm sitting there and I look down at my compass and I'm going this way. Because that's the way I know I should be going. And I said, I've got to follow the compass. And so I'd try to push on my left rudder to turn that plane this way, and my foot wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. It's like you driving along the road 70 miles an hour, and you're driving there, and the ditch is over here to the right, and I tell you, now I want you to steer to the right. You won't do it. See, you can't do it. And so I sat there and I fought that thing all the way home. And what do you know? The compass was right. When I got back on and went there, and so I got out, and just like Rod, I've made it. Now his point was this, that being a Christian is just like flying like that. When you get mixed up, you think you know what you're doing. You absolutely know this is the way that you ought to go. But your instruments say no. Now, if you don't follow the instruments, you're going to get in trouble. Now, what I'm telling you is not so bad. But also, and I've been in this situation, and luckily had an instructor on my side, that you're flying along. He says, okay, do this or do this. And so they put a thing up where you can't see out the window. You have to fly with your instruments. And all of a sudden, I am heading straight to the ground. Now I'm heading straight to the ground. And I can tell the engine sounds funny. It's going like this. But I know what I'm doing. See, I understand what I'm doing. And I look up, and those stupid instruments are going crazy. Just going like this. He said, pull your glasses off. I pull my glasses off, and I'm heading straight to the ground. And I didn't know that because I'm trying to fly by my own feelings. Now, in just a few more seconds, of course, I would have been dead. Now, you can ask Rod because he'd been through this, and the way he told me about this, I know he's done those stupid things, see? And so here's what it is, and here's his point. He said, you know, when we're flying along in life, it's just like flying that airplane. You fly along and you say, here's what I should do. And it gets you in trouble. Well, I'll do this, and it gets you in trouble. And you think you know what you're doing, but you're in trouble. Now, if you look at your instruments and you look at what God says, and God says, now do this, almost every time it will be opposite of what it feels like you should do. You'll feel like, well, I should do this. But every time, if you'll do what God tells you to do, it'll always turn out right. And so that's what Romans 12 is really about. And that's why he gave us this such good example. That as we fly through life, we see these things. And he tells us, do this. Now we need to ask ourselves the question, am I doing this? And if we find we're not, we better change. We better change or we're going to have a spiritual crash. Right? Now, as we look today, think about it in that way. And you'll see this doesn't come natural. Flying an airplane does not come naturally. Flying an airplane is where you have to learn to do everything opposite of your instincts. You have to learn to do things that your instincts say do this, then you have to do this. And that really is what flying is all about. And that's what living a Christian life is all about. Guess why, as you look out over the world, and you go back and you study history from Genesis down to now, guess why the greater part of humanity have been all mixed up, all confused, and wicked? Think about it. Think about your Bible history. And you say, well, this is the way it's always been in the world, that mankind has just been going through life all mixed up. Yeah, that's true. Guess why? Why is it? It's because mankind never has tried to really follow the Word of God. Think about Genesis 6. Why was it God said, now I'm going to destroy the world? I'm going to destroy it because every thought and every imagination of man's mind is evil continually. That means that they weren't paying attention to this. They were doing what they thought they should do. Now we look at the situation that the world is in today. We hear it on the news, and that's all that you can hear. Why is it that the world, got itself in the mess that we're in today? You look at it and you say, it just happened. All of a sudden, 4 months ago, we were great shape. And then just all of a sudden, the whole world is in a tailspin. And all of a sudden, our Congress today is working to say, how can we pull out of this tailspin? And we're arguing back and forth. What got us into it? So as you get back, you begin to learn, well, this company did this and this company did that. And you look and everybody was looking out for themselves. Everybody is just sucking in the money. And all of a sudden, you don't have any left out there. See, we didn't get in this mess because people were following God's Word. We didn't get in this mess because all of these CEOs got up every day and says, now, I want to be honest today. I'm not going to be selfish. I want to do what God tells me to do. Had they been doing that, the world would just be running as smooth as it can possibly be. And so it is with us. And that's what Romans 12 is all about. So we look at it and we ask ourselves, am I flying through life the way God would have me to do it? Am I flying through life by reading my instruments, reading what God says, or am I doing it by doing what I would want to say? Well, I think that's a good introduction to this lesson. Maybe we ought to give Rod an hour or two to tell you about all the dumb things he's done so he could give us this good illustration that we've got in doing this thing. But here's what God says. He started back in the first two verses, and he said, I want all of you. I want your body totally. He said, I have paid for your body. You were bought with a price. I want your body totally and completely dedicated to me as a living sacrifice. And I want your mind totally dedicated to me. I want them both. And I want you to do that by changing your mind. You see, that's what it's all about. Remember we talked about that butterfly? How that you have to have that transformation. And he said, I want you to transform your mind so that you'll go from a worm to a butterfly. Okay, this is what he's dealing with. So now let's pick up our story where we left off the last time and look at some things now that Paul is going to tell us that we need to do in order to do this. Now, we must change our mind from the mind of the world to the mind of Christ. That's what this chapter is all about. Right down here now, we're in human, everyday relationships. So he said, set not your mind on high things, but condescend to things that are lowly. Now, the term high things, and what we do with this is just define those words. When we define the words, why then we're halfway there to see what it means. High things are things that are looked on in the world as great and powerful. Now, don't set your mind on high things. We need to set our mind. We need to set our mind. Colossians 3 tells us, set your mind on things that are above and not on things of this world. We need to set our minds. Now, as Christians, we talk about having a mindset. We need to set our minds. What's the difference between somebody who has set his mind and somebody who is just flying through life doing what he wants to do? Now, there are people who have set their minds on being rich. That's their mindset. That's what they get up and that's what they're striving for every day, is to be rich. Now, we've seen a whole lot of that lately, and we see where it gets you. There are people who set their minds on being powerful. I want to be a senator. I want to be the president. I want to be a governor. In other words, I want to have power in some way or another. And as we look in the world of politics, we see these people that have their mindset. Each one of these guys will come up, they'll make their speech, and their speech is always about me. Let me tell you why I am the best man. I want you to vote for me. They're striving to get in that power seat. Their mind is set. Now, generally, the man who has his mind set the hardest is the one that will go ahead and achieve that particular office. But now what Paul is saying here, don't set your mind on high things. That is, don't set your mind on the great and powerful things that the world looks at. I want to be noted as a rich, successful person, or as a person that has power, or whatever it is. Don't set your mind on that. If you have your mind set on that, you're going to fly through life and you're going to have a crash, is what it's all about. Now he goes ahead and he said, but condescend. Wow, that's an interesting word. Condescend to things that are lowly. Now that's kind of opposite of what we are taught in everyday life. Condescend means to be carried away with. Put yourself on a level with or accommodate yourself to the lowly. In other words, there's something we need to be carried away with. Now, when you think about carried away, we generally think about something that is bad, don't we? Well, that person is just carried away with sports. That person is just carried away with work. He just carried away with politics. We know what carried away with. It means engrossed in. It means giving your life to. Now, don't be carried away with these high things, but condescend or be carried away with things that are lowly. The word lowly there merely means humble. Truly humble. Now, in a minute, we're going to see that humble doesn't mean that you put on an act, but humble is something that you really are. There's a whole great big world of difference between somebody who acts humble and somebody who is truly humble. They're just north and south, as far as they can be one from the other. One is a hypocrite, and the other is a true Christian. And so we'll talk about that just a little later, because he's going to deal with this particular thing. But now be carried away with that. Don't be carried away with the big, powerful, successful things in the world, but set your mind on a certain thing and be carried away with, I'm going to be the kind of person God would have me to be. Here's a passage of Scripture that tells us something about God's attitude. He said, for behold your calling, brethren, that not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. Now, of course, when you're called by the gospel, Paul tells us. Now, it means that you hear the gospel, and when you hear the gospel, it has an effect on your life, and it changes your life, and it turns you around, and you become a Christian. There's no difference between the called people and Christians. Now, what he's saying is, look out among you, brethren. Check your status. Check the people that is around you. And you're going to find that not many wise after the flesh. Now, he puts that in there for a purpose. In the church, we have a lot of wise people. But in the church, we have very few people who are wise after the flesh. Now you say, what is the difference? Well, the difference is that we have a lot of wise people who say, I don't know the answer to that problem. I don't know what to do. What I think, it just seems to me like, here's what we should do, but I don't know the answer. Now then we're starting to get some wisdom. So I'm going to search and see what God says. And if I can find what God says, then that is going to be my answer. Now that's a wise person. A wise person is somebody who knows they don't know. The unwise person, or the wise person after the flesh, is somebody that is living and letting their flesh determine what's right and what's wrong. That's what's got the world in such a mess right now. I think it's amazing to all of us that you look at the mess the world is in the financial realm, and you think, who got us there? And as you think about who got us there, it's the most powerful people in the world. I'm talking about all the way around the world. It's the big leaders. It's the rich people. It's the powerful people. It's the people who know finances. It's the people who can talk about trillions and trillions of dollars when you and I have a hard time talking about any more than $1,000. So it's these people who got us into all of this trouble. Right? Take this Madoff, $50 billion. He's taken away from these people. Is there a wiser man in finances than he? You think about that. People sit down and say, how did he do that? How did he do that? It boggles our mind. We can't figure it out. It's because he's wise. He was able to figure out a scheme that the rest of the world couldn't catch him on. He's wise after the flesh. That's what we're talking about. There's a wisdom after the flesh. And what that wisdom has done, we can look around and see, well, really, that's what got us into this situation. Now, here's what's scary to me and to you. How are we going to get out? We're going to get out by turning it over to the same people who got us in. And we're going to say, now, you people are so wise, you can certainly get us out. Kind of makes you go with your forehead, doesn't it? That is there. Now, this is real stuff. This is the reason I'm going slow today. And it's the reason I'm taking examples, human examples around about us. Let's look and let's see what is around about us and see what it is. Think of anything you want to think of. Think of your sports heroes. Think of your politicians, whatever you want to think of. And you think here of these things wise after the flesh. Now, he goes ahead, God says he chose the foolish things of the world. That is, things that the world said is foolish, that he might put to shame them that are wise. And God chose the weak things of the world that he might put to shame the things that are strong. And the base or the lowly things of the world, that the things that are despised, did God choose, yea, and the things that are not, that he might bring to naught the things that are, that no flesh should glory before God. You know, when you think about all of this, you can go back and you can say, well, let's use some illustrations of the Bible. How can you figure that out in the Bible? Well, in the Bible, you start out, and God made the world. Now, he tells us that he made the world, and he made it out of nothing. See? He made it out of nothing. Now, the wisdom of the world can't conceive of this. So the wisdom of the world says, no, it had to be something. The physical always had to be here. And so they concoct then the theories here and finally come up with the Big Bang Theory. And then they start working on this, And they come up with all kind of silly stuff. Evolution. You came from a mosquito. That's the wisdom of the world. But you get back and you say, no, God, He just took nothing and He created the world. And God has been controlling the world with the base things. You remember what He told Nebuchadnezzar? When Nebuchadnezzar, the mightiest, most powerful man on the face of the earth, the king of Babylon, Daniel had told him, God put you on this throne, and God is going to take you off. So this young man had told him that. Now when I say this young man, let's stop there. Now then we're going to get confused because we're getting too much on our mind. We're going to take the strongest man in the world, Nebuchadnezzar. But over here is Daniel. Now think about who Daniel was. He was that little teenage boy that Nebuchadnezzar had kidnapped and brought over and had trained in a Babylonian style to become one of his advisors. So here's this kid. And this kid comes in. Nebuchadnezzar's all bothered by this dream. And God had used Daniel to interpret a dream. So his advisors, Nebuchadnezzar's advisors said, you know, there's a kid out there that he was able to tell the dream. So Nebuchadnezzar pulled him up and said, you tell me this dream. Well, poor little Daniel, who is a nothing. Now I know to you and me he's a great hero, but how did he get to be a great hero? I'm talking about at that time he was a little nothing. He was just a young guy, nothing. So he pulls up this nothing, this young kid, and said, now here it is, I have this dream, and I want it interpreted. And so he had put forth some real harsh orders in there. So Daniel, this little boy, he said, well, King, here's what it means. And he tells him. And in essence, he says, God put you in office, and God's going to take you out. Well, there's this kid, this nothing, this little base, little nothing, no power. And here is King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's walking in his courts, and he has the power at the snap of a finger to wipe out nations. And he looked at it and he says, is it not I who have built all of this? Have not I? And he looked at all the things he had done. And that then is when God told him, he said, now Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to teach you a lesson by turning you really into a human who's like a cow that's out in the field eating grass. And you're going to go out there and you're going to eat grass until you learn a lesson. And the lesson is, you're going to learn that God raises up the basest of men. That God will take the very lowest of man and put him in offices. And He'll take the highest and remove him. And you're going to learn that God rules in the kingdom of men, and He doesn't rule just on the basis of power. So King Nebuchadnezzar spent the next 7 years eating grass and learning that lesson. What's the lesson? The great power? No. The little boy who was really nothing was something. We could go to Esther, couldn't we? That little girl, scared to death of her husband. Mordecai, a big nothing. A guy sitting out on the street, a big nothing. Who was it that saved the Jewish nation? And on we could go. See? On and on we could go. In any realm that you want to get in. And you find, well, God does. God does take these weak, base, lowly things. And it's not the high and powerful things that get us out of problems. It's the high and powerful things that gets us into problems. So now, set your mind. Set your mind. Condescend Now, here's what this means, and think about it. Don't any of you say, oh, well, I was born that way. No, you weren't. No, you have to condescend. You have to tell yourself, I am not the greatest. I don't have the answers. I must rely upon God's truth. I've got to condescend. I do not have those answers. And so we have to teach ourselves so that we can condescend, so that we can say, even though it doesn't sound right, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. Now, this is a good place to stop, because here it is, we can come back to Rod again. And some of these days he can tell us of his stupidity, of how many times he's been in there and he knows what he's doing. Oh, Rod knows what he's doing. He knows here's what he should be doing. And you can't believe these other things because Rod knows what he's doing. And then all of a sudden, he found out that if he'd kept doing what he thought he should be doing, he'd have crashed that little red airplane he had years and years and years ago. See? That's the way it is with us. Until we come to the point that we understand we don't know, and we're going to have to condescend and do what God tells us to do, or we're going to crash ourselves in this life. It's just that simple. Now, next week, we're going to talk about some things that's really, 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 really hard to do. Okay, class dismissed.